So welcome to this latest No Silver Bullet webinar, and I'm delighted that Dave Ulrich has agreed to join us. And I think it's some unearthly hour in the US where Dave is, or possibly not too unearthly, about 8 o'clock. Just to frame the session for you, I know a number of you, in fact I know many of you. My name's Steve Hearsum. I am an independent consultant, facilitator and coach, and also currently writing, although it's going more slowly given the arrival of a new puppy, homeschooling and lockdown, a book on the theme of No Silver Bullet. And I'm not going to say any more on that because if you want to know more about that project, I'll send a link through to the newsletter, and you're always welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll happily tell you. These webinars are all part of an open inquiry that comes from the book. And I invite people who I think are going to be interesting and are on the themes from the book. And the latest I stumbled across, much as I've known about Dave for a while, that we had a lovely exchange on LinkedIn. And Dave, more fool him, said yes when I said, well, do you fancy coming have a chat? So Dave, would you just briefly like to introduce yourself so that everyone knows who
you bet. Let me say that I think sometimes the pandemic and the distancing that we've got makes us separate. I think it actually makes us closer. I'm excited to peek into some of your offices. Nick, I don't know what that animal is behind your head or that drawing, but it's just fascinating to see. And so welcome to my office. This is not a background, it's where I live and where I work, and you get to peek into that. I'm a professor at Michigan, part-time. Been there for decades, but since before most of you were born, probably. And I love to look at ideas that have impact. That's my passion around organization, people kinds of issues. So I won't do more than that. You can find out about me if you look me up, I think. But I'm so delighted with Steve when I saw some of his provocation. By the way, welcome to the 20 provocateurs and activists. There aren't enough in our field. I assume each of you have some of that provocative attitude, that little bit of Petra, the ready to argue, ready to push. I feel some of the same. So my wife told me, she's a very good psychologist, and I'll stop with this. I have OCD. And I said, wow, that's obsessive compulsive. She said, no, Dave, you have organizational compulsive disorder. Every time you go to lunch somewhere, you tell the manager to come over and you say, I could reorganize your delivery system for food in this restaurant and give you a 10% productivity increase. And Wendy, my wife, said, that's why you don't get to go to lunch with very many people, because you consistently, you do that at your church, and we've had to change churches. You do it where you eat, you do it at the university. You've done it at airlines. You've sent letters to the CEO at an airline and told him how to reorganize his airline unsolicited. That's my passion, and I hope the 20 of us are all provocateurs and activists who want to push agendas. So, Steve, thank you. That's enough for me.
You're welcome. So let's just do a bit of setup, and I'll explain to you what the format is going to be. Bear with me 1 second. So I'm going to tell you briefly, very briefly, about the hypothesis behind the research. Then we'll frame the conversation for today. Me and Dave will have an exchange for around about 20 odd minutes, and then we'll give you 10 to 15 minutes in small groups to chew on some of the ideas that may have been thrown about between me and Dave before we have a final chunk of time just for a bit of open conversation and Q&A, managing the group size as best as we can and the logistics of that. So that's the format. In terms of the background, I will simply say this. The central thrust of my writing is built upon the not unsurprising thing that you can't go outside your house or read a newspaper or watch a TV channel without coming across somebody saying that there's no silver bullet for something. My own work in organisations is that often senior leaders look for a guaranteed answer, and there are many people prepared to sell them quick fixes and guaranteed answers. And the underlying hypothesis of the research is that there is a functional collusion that goes on between clients, organisations, and the many providers and purveyors of quick fixes and silver bullets. I'm not going to say any more about that. As I say, you can actually access some extracts from the book at the moment if you sign up to the newsletter. So I'd also like to invite you, just briefly, to quickly go to a new web browser and open up menti.com and enter that code. Okay, and you will see that there is a question for you there. Bear with me 1 second. Just need to move on the slide. There we go. So I'd like you to just answer the question, what oversimplifications or blatant repackaging of old as new have you seen? And we're obviously thinking about organisations. We're thinking about your practice. For those of you who are internals, it might be as you've encountered consultants. What oversimplifications or blatant repackaging of old as new have you come across? Hopefully we'll see some answers going in there in a moment. Are people typing madly? Ah, brilliant. Dean, you've just joined us. If you go to menti.com and use the code you can see on the screen, then we've just got a Menti screen open just to get some responses to the question, what oversimplifications and blatant repackaging of old as new have you seen? So it's interesting that resilience and mindfulness is there. Lovely. Best practice. Don't get Dave and me started on best practice. Please don't. I think we both have our own soapboxes for that. Interesting.
Sorry, Steve, I don't know if the answers are meant to be shown on the screen, but I just see the Menti screen.
If you go onto the menti.com website, let me just, you should be seeing on if you go to Zoom, you should see it.
I don't see the answers. I just see the.
Okay, let me just throw it up again.
Yeah, the same. That I'm on the Menti thing.
Bear with me.
No
right.
problem.
In Zoom, you should see it. Is that showing now?
It says you've started sharing.
It doesn't say it might be some time though.
It's a long way away.
As is the joy with technology.
There's this silver bullet of people going, oh, hold on, am I sharing my screen yet? Am I on mute?
Let me just put it up again because it doesn't want to do it. I love it when things go smooth. Right.
This is just you proving that there is no such thing as best practice, isn't it?
Absolutely. What can you see now?
What example?
Just a black screen.
Right, that's really irritating.
Is this what you were hoping for, Steve?
No, it's not. So I'm not going to sweat it. So what I'm going to do is I will tell you this. What's gone up is things like McKinsey's reassertion of the 7S model, culture change as a journey, bringing in of new management teams brought in by PE companies or investors to turn around the company. There's actually several people talking about well-being and yoga and things like that, the whole kind of mindfulness industry. The self-checkout system in a supermarket, I think that's my favourite. So there's VUCA, yeah. So various things there that certainly are on my radar. You will get downloads and PDFs of these pages from menti.com. I'll send that out to you after the event. Okay. So our starting point today is this, and hopefully you can now see something on screen. Please tell me you can.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
So this was something from an exchange that Dave and I had as we were early on in our conversation about this, and I'm not going to read it verbatim because there's nothing more boring than a facilitator or a presenter reading something verbatim. But I'm going to invite you just to scan that, and I'm going to draw your attention to a couple of key themes in it. So notice there we've got, the language of quick fixes and silver bullets, and this link to the fact that they often don't have sustainable impact. And the challenge for leaders of actually getting above the complexity and the noise, and actually I'd argue the tension and the anxiety of organisational life. And Dave kindly shared with me another article that he's written recently, which I absolutely loved. And in it was this. And this is the start, Dave, of our conversation. So Dave talks about this tension where practitioners, and Dave is talking about business leaders and us as consultants, facing real challenges and real pressing problems that invite us to come up with answers for our clients quickly. But success is measured less by those ideas and more by actions that resolve those challenges. And Dave, I thought that was really interesting, because what you're opening up there is this idea that actually there's a real similarity between consultants and leaders that I don't think always gets acknowledged, which is actually at the heart of, underneath the skin of my book. And just so you know, this is going to go in the book, and I will credit you, because I think it's a really fascinating thing that is not acknowledged, that both leaders and consultants have the same anxiety pushing them to put arguably the same unhelpful behaviour. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Let me obviously agree. And I think we're now moving into this period of conversation time. Let me tell a quick anecdote that changed my professional trajectory. I was trained in my PhD program as a numerical taxonomist. And if anybody knows what that is, I'm going to send you a free dinner. If anybody cares, I'll send you 2. A taxonomist is a scientist who looks at data to find simplicity and complexity. That's taxonomy. There's only 2 in the entire history of the organizational profession, my advisor and me. He wrote a book that was 450 pages with no examples because he wanted to get into the theory of taxonomy. And my dissertation was about numerical taxonomy. So it's applying statistics and mathematics to find simplicity. I've applied that throughout my career. I love organization and the science and the rigor and the statistics and the math. So I'm doing consulting probably 25 years ago, 30 years ago, in a meeting in the United States in Chicago about leadership and where leaders are going, and very confident as a burgeoning academic. At 9 o'clock, we took a break, and all of a sudden, everybody got on their phones, and they had those, remember 20 years ago, the long phones with the stems, and they had all those. They came back and said, Irwin Jacobs, who's a green mail artist, and back then you'd go to 4.9% of stock. This is too long of a story. And you'd stay there. But if you go over 5%, it's a publicly traded stock transaction. He went from 4.9 to 15% of their stock at 8 o'clock that morning, New York time. He wants green mail. He wants to hold them hostage so that their stock at 20, they'll pay him 30 to get it back. We come back into the meeting. They say, gee, you're doing this great talk around collaboration and leadership. What do we do to solve this green mail challenge? Because it's real. If we don't solve it, we're going to get taken over. And I said, I don't know. So they said, you're dismissed. It was on a Friday. I went home. I went to the academic literature and said, what does the research tell us about solving this challenge? And there wasn't a thing, not a thing. So over the next 48 hours, I did the hardest work I've ever done. I tried to think through, what is it a leadership team can do to solve that problem? I tried to create a theory, a real-time theory. How do you respond? How do you act? How do you make things happen? They invited me back on Tuesday, and together we created a strategy to respond to Irwin Jacobs' takeover challenge. It suddenly hit me that there's a gap between research and practice. And between that gap is we want to play a great game. Some practitioners would have given a quick fix silver bullet. Some researchers want to get deep data. I want to discover the connection between the two. That's my passion, Steve, is how do we find, on the one hand, and that quote said, here's a silver bullet. You know, let's all go do a mindful workshop. We'll all sit in the room. We'll put on our yoga hats. And we'll hum and we'll chant. Boy, that feels good. How do you feel? I feel great. What are you going to do different? Nothing. And it's a silver bullet. It's foo-foo. It's quick fix. It doesn't work. On the other hand, if you ignore that research, you're prone to rediscovering the world. And so, Steve, how do you navigate that tension between a quick fix idea? By the way, some of the consultants on Friday morning would have said, I have an answer on your solution. I have an answer of how to make that happen. And they would have given a silver bullet, and it would have led that team astray. In that 48 hours, I did research. I studied what was out there related to takeover. Just one other quick example, a company you probably may remember, General Electric. Jack Welch, you've all heard of him. It shows how old I am. I can still say his name without laughing. He wanted to change the culture at GE, and he had a meeting. Just so you know, I am a provocateur, and he had the 60 faculty who taught at Crotonville. I was the youngest in the room by 10 years. And he said, change the culture, create a new cultural change agenda, build a 2-day training program, the Silver Bullet, and we'll put 200,000 people through the training program and the culture will be changed. I raised my hand and I said, Mr. Welch, with all due respect, if you want to waste $15 million, go buy a jet. At least you won't screw up the company by flying around in your jet. This 2-day program, this quick fix Silver Bullet in Steve's language, is going to create more harm than good. By the way, I heard a collective sigh. All my senior faculty from the top university, ooh, who's that young stupid kid? At the break, they all said, it was good knowing you for 4 hours. You're going to get fired. Welch called me in the next day and he said, how do we change that? And I said, Jack, I don't want to meet with you for 48 hours. I don't want to give you a silver bullet to your silver bullet. Give me 48 hours to look at the research. Give me 48 hours. If you've known GE's history at all, they did a program called Workout. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that. That's where that came from. That it was taking the challenge, not with a silver bullet. By the way, quick aside. At that point, I said, yes, let's do the $15 million program and I'll do it. And then I'll buy the jet because I'll go run your program for you. And I said, anyway, that was a little temptation. But we didn't do that. We took time to get the research to solve the problem. Steve, that's a long answer with 2 anecdotes.
So let me give you another prompt and see what answer this one gets, which is what strikes me, what you're describing there, Dave, is 2 things. So firstly, that first story, the Greenwell story you told, what went through my head was there was not only a client, but also consultants that were not up for doing the work proper. That they, whether it was anxiety driven or ego driven or shame driven or whatever, the work proper, which means not knowing, being uncomfortable, not having clarity about what the outcome might be, was not wanting to
Not
be
yet.
engaged with.
In a bit, I think it's too hot at the moment. We should leave it.
Rachel, you may want to go on mute.
That's right, I'll just fix that. There we go. Done it, Rachel. And the second thing is, everything you've described, Dave, is predicated on a willingness to inquire.
Oh, that's great.
Without inquiry, there can be no change.
And Steve, if I can come back at you, it's the willingness also to say, I don't know. I mean, think of that first company. I don't know how to deal with green, but I can find out. There is some research at Welch. When he called that night and said, can you be in my office tomorrow and give me a way to create a culture change? The answer was no. Give me a little bit of time to go find the research. And I think the humility to say, I don't know, but I can find out. And Steve, I see that I think the silver bullet people say, I have an answer in search of a solution. I call that playing Jeopardy. The answer is 7S. Well, let me go to your list. The answer is 7S. The answer is culture. It's an answer in search of a solution. Take a gun out. That's a bad metaphor, but take a gun outside, close your eyes and shoot and hope a bird flew over. That's not helpful. But that humility to say, by the way, this is hard work, because you say, I don't know, but I'm willing to go find out with you. I think that's, Steve, a real challenge for leaders as well as consultants.
So in our brief chat before everybody joined, I mentioned to you the work of Richard Claydon and this idea of dirty consulting. And one of the things Richard talks about, I asked him, so what do you mean by dirty consulting? And he said, well, it's the antithesis of your suited and booted, briefcase carrying, smart, polished consultant. It's the consultant who walks into the client and says, look, I don't know what the problem is, and I'm not going to know what the problem is until you and I sit down with your people, and together we might work out what the problem is, and then maybe if we're lucky, we might be able to work out what to do.
Nice.
But that messiness, that dirtiness, which is what Richard calls it, that dirty consulting, is the antithesis of what is typically sold. So I know with my own practice, my own clients, I can feel the pull sometimes from clients, for me to give them sufficient polish and sufficient clarity that the anxiety will be managed.
I love it.
And
Go ahead. I love it.
and I want to do that, but I don't want to collude so far. So I'm just interested in your response to that.
I love to coach people with simple tips that have hopefully good background. If you retain a consulting firm, let's just say the M company, and you can imagine who the M company is. I think the thing you want to do, two things. Will we adapt, not adopt? If they come to you with a 7-step solution or a health index, those are hypothetical, will you adapt your tool to us? Second, can we put one of our people on your team? We want a lease to own your knowledge, not rent it. We want one of our good people, high potential, to join your team for the next 3 to 6 months so that what you do transfer, we lease to own your knowledge. By the way, I've had some of those consulting firms say, oh no, I have the answer. You need to adopt it. And we can't let you join our consulting team. We want to rent you our knowledge for an eternity. By the way, please, I beg of you, do not hire them, because what you create is a dependency. You create a dependency. I want a lease to own your knowledge. And so, by the way, we've had some clients, Steve, not want to work with us because they say, just come in and solve our problem. And we're going, no, we don't want to come in and solve your problem. We want you to solve your problem. So by the way, that lease to own, adapt, don't adopt are 2 lines that I have found helpful as you look at consultants.
So let me just, where I've jumped to there, Dave, is, I was reading up on the organizational guidance system, which is your approach to helping organizations. And I was very deliberate in my choice of words there, not solving, but helping. And I was, as I've read up about the OGS, I've got more and more interested in how your clients, or the extent to which your clients then begin to use that as a way of projecting onto you that the OGS is the answer, and how you respond to that.
Well, let me describe the problem we're trying to solve with the OGS. I have received in the last, and I think I just posted this somewhere, in the last 45 days since January, probably 50 solutions from different groups. And I'll use your list. It's mindfulness, it's best practice, it's 7S, it's agility. That's a hot one today. The question I've got is, which of those solutions will work for me? Which, or you? Of all those options that are out there, which one works for me? And the metaphor for me is really simple. Imagine, who can I pick? Rachel, you just won the lottery and you got 10 million quid. Whoa, that's pretty cool. Rachel is now happy. Where do I invest that money? Where do I invest that money so that I'm going to get the outcomes that I care about? I think it's that question, Steve, that's so critical with guidance. It's not best practice. It's not benchmarking. And so what we're trying to say is, we're trying to say, where should you invest money in all of those well-intended initiatives, agility, retention, well-being, leadership, empathy? Where should you invest to get the outcomes you care about? I'll give one quick example. A company we worked with, I won't name this one, has just spent about $1 million creating an algorithm to define retention. What's it going to take to keep our most talented people?
Training.
Great question. Great question. And who's likely to leave? So they've created an algorithm. They've actually got a patent on it. You're more likely to leave if you've posted on LinkedIn, if you have a bad boss. Here's the thing we found in our research. There's 10 possible talent initiatives you could embark on. By the way, there's 30 or 40, but we started with 10. Retaining people is one in it, hiring people, training people, performance management. In our research, we found that retaining people has no impact on employee engagement, customer value, financial performance, or community citizenship.
Really?
So not of those 10 initiatives, it's the least valuable. By the way, that's good to know. I'm going to spend $1 million on talent. Where should I spend it? That's the question our guidance system is. And by the way, where do we spend it? We spend it where the consultants tell us, or we spend it where other companies are spending it. Why don't we have data that tells us where to spend that money? Where does Rachel want to invest her 10 million so that she has money to live well? Anyway, Steve, that's the question that the guidance system is trying to answer, is what will work for you in terms of that allocation of investment.
And do you find clients coming to you and you have to disabuse them of the notion that it's got the answer?
Oh, we've described this as a journey. Let's say it's a journey from London to Paris. We haven't even gotten into the English Channel yet. Everybody wants to be in Paris and say, give me the answer, give me the silver bullet. And my answer is, we're still not out of London. We haven't got past Gatwick yet. We're trying to discover a process to get you to Paris, but we're not even close. And we've gone to people and they say, well, name 3 companies who've done it. Now I'm on to best practice. I think best practice is one of the biggest mistakes our field has been addicted to. If we're successful, we'll be as good as somebody we don't care about.
So,
what?
So, Dave, what's going on for me is I've got tingling going up the back of my neck because I'm sitting here listening to you. And to me, everything you're saying, I'm thinking, kindred spirit, I love what you're thinking. It could be myself on my own soapbox saying similar things to you. And I sometimes find myself speaking out and saying stuff similar to you and feeling like I'm, if not the odd man out, I'm certainly not in the majority. Because if I was, there wouldn't be so many consultancies, big, small, and also, if we're really honest, independent practitioners who are in this functional collusion of selling guaranteed answers. And here we have you, somebody with lots of experience and a reputation and a profile far greater than mine, who's quite capable of making a lot of noise. And yet between the Dave Ulriches of this world and the Steve Hearsums and everybody else who might be making a similar noise, the dominant narrative remains that if you look hard enough, there's an answer.
And by the way, Steve, does there need to be an answer? There needs to be a direction, but not an answer. I mean, you need to move. And that's the other danger is you say, it's all crap. It's all foo-foo. It's all silver bullet. It's all fad. So I won't listen to anybody. That is equally as dangerous because then what you do is you repackage old ideas. I am so frustrated. This is when my staff at our consulting group, and I'm sure Steve they say, Dave, we want to set you off. We're going to go. By the way, somebody this week posted, Dave Ulrich is wrong. HR should be part of the business and help business solve its problems. What? I've written about that for 30 years. They've repackaged old stuff, and now they've created a vicious cycle that isn't moving anything forward. That's new wine in old bottles. And so on the one hand, you don't want a silver bullet. On the other, you don't want to just repackage ideas. So Steve, how do you get people's attention on this? I mean, we rant and rave and yell, we get 20 people on a call. That's really sad. How do you get people to pay attention to this? I have some ideas, but how do you get people to pay attention to the need for great ideas to solve tomorrow's problems without them being silver bullets? How do you do that?
Well, we're into almost a philosophical and existential conversation, and those on today who've maybe read Albert Camus would probably contribute more than I can. But there's a book by Dan Gardner, a Canadian journalist. He wrote it about, I think, 10, 12 years ago called Risk. And in it, he talks about how human beings understand risk and how risk is portrayed in politics and the media. And one of the things that's stuck in my mind about this is that he actually lays out the data, the relative risks of being killed in a terrorist attack, of dying of diabetes. This was shortly after 9/11, actually, of dying in an airplane accident or a car crash. And what he demonstrates is that our ability to assess risk is utterly irrational. That if it was actually about spending money where it is most useful, you wouldn't spend the money you do on anti-terrorism. You'd actually be better off spending it, and I think that the key one was you'd spend it certainly on diabetes prevention, and you'd probably put it on asteroid defences, because you're more likely to be killed by an asteroid than you are by a terrorist, certainly at that time.
That's cool.
So we're now into, are we actually wrestling with the irrationality, the predictable irrationality, as Dan Ariely would put it, of human beings, and the delusion. I use the term deliberately, not illusion. The delusion is that we delude ourselves that we're being rational as we're in this dance between consultant and client.
I love the risk. I'd frame it not just avoiding risk, but discovering opportunity, because you want to discover what's going to be the opportunity for our future. Quick anecdote: about 4 months ago, somebody convinced me to have lunch with them, and they had the latest and greatest silver bullet app on employee engagement. And they showed me their phone app. It could measure sentiment. It could track it. It had an app, and it was just incredible. And after about a 15-minute pitch, they looked at me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "This is my answer to this question." I said, "Why should I do this?" And they said, "Because it's the best app ever for employee engagement. Look what it does." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because it measures, it's real time, it's portable, it's mobile. Why should I care?" And they said, "What are you getting at?" And I said, "My answer is not just to avoid risk of what could go wrong, but to discover opportunity, what could go right." When I sit with a business leader as a consultant or as an HR person, my first question is not what's the solution? What is it you're trying to solve? What is it you're trying to solve? What's the outcome you're looking at? Is it employee retention? Is it customer service? Is it financial results? Is it community reputation? How will your app solve that problem? You've just spent 15 minutes and you've not given me a solution to a problem I care about. You've convinced me you're two smart guys. I'll buy you lunch, but I'm not going to invest in you.
Yeah.
It's just a waste of money because you don't have a sense of the value. So, by the way, I really love that idea of risk. What a clever argument. And
it's a great book.
It's a great book.
So I'm going to throw one more question at you. Then I'm going to just give people a heads up. I'm going to put you into pairs for a 5-minute kind of rattle around of what's going on for you following this conversation. And that will leave hopefully about 10, 15 minutes for us just to as a group, play with some stuff. And the last question I want to ask you, Dave, is what's coming up for me now is a question of ethics. Because when I look at the article you sent me this morning, and in there you talk about 3 choices that we face. There's the challenging traditional assumptions about what we know. There's claiming your personal choice, which for me has been about personal responsibility, and engaging in relevant research or practical theory to meld theory and research and practice and solutions. So what's coming up for me is there's an ethical question here about what I choose to do or not do, and there's also then an ethical question about the different fields of practice.
Great comment. By the way, that's a paper. Get a hold of Steve if you want a copy. It's called "Making Knowledge Productive," and
it's a great paper. I'll Dave, if you want, I can send it out when I send out the recording.
Send out the recording.
Okay, I'll send it.
In the academic world, and by the way, I told Steve, by the way, this is pathetic. This is my idea friends woke me up at 4 o'clock this morning, and Steve and I had a discussion, and then I told my idea friends to go away. But in the academic world, that paper is going to take 1.5 years to get published, which is so frustrating. It's one of the problems in this world. I love the idea, and the post I'm going to do next Tuesday is on personalization. What works for you? What works for me? What do I need to do to be successful? And I think that's where we need to start a lot of these conversations. What do I need, or what does my organization need? Or if I'm a consultant, what does your organization need? What do you need as a leader to be successful? And unless we can personalize and tailor some of those discussions, we end up with quick fixes. Again, I use a stupid example: take a gun and shoot it and hope a bird flies over. It's just, and that's why consulting is so unsuccessful, because we don't start with what you need. Back to that stupid mobile app example. And by the way, I gave them advice. Go find out what business leaders need. They didn't take my advice. Sit down with a business leader. What are you worried about? What's on your mind? What keeps you awake at night? By the way, it could be takeover. It could be in the late 80s, the green mail. It could be changing a culture at General Electric. It could be a digital solution. It could be changing our market from product to service. Good. If that's what you're worried about, let's co-discover a solution. That's where I think the quick fixes. There's still new ideas. I just get worried. In fact, when I saw Steve's stuff, I wanted to make sure we're not avoiding new ideas. We're just trying to co-create ideas that will have an impact.
Correct.
And so avoiding silver bullets is not jump to the other extreme. Oh, there's nothing we're going to do. By the way, that's stupid. That's repackaging old crap. And that's the wrong way to say it. That's repackaging old good ideas. Anyway, Steve, I just feel such passion about this stuff. And the things you list, 7S, you need to have an organizational framework. It may not be 7S. What is your organizational framework? What are the systems? Culture change. Yeah, you do need to change your culture. So what's the next step in that evolution of culture? How do you move that forward? You do need to be mindful. Our daughter just published a book on mindfulness. So how can I say no? She's got a great book. It actually sold more than most of my books. So I've been outsold by my daughter, which is fantastic. But it isn't a solution in search of an answer. It isn't let's go do yoga mats and charts, and it's how do you do that? And so anyway, that's the stuff I hope that those of us in this field don't just do a vicious circle of recycling and repackaging. Do a spiral. How do I learn? How do I grow? How do I build on the great idea that Dean or Zara shared? How do I take that idea and let's co-create the next idea? That's the world that I want to live in, is spiraling forward, not cycling backward. So anyway, I'm doing a lot of stupid comments. So Steve, I'll turn it back to you.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put you all into pairs, and it literally is a 5-minute, deliberately compressed conversation. There'll be one trio, I think, and it literally is what's bubbling up for you, and then we'll have the best part of 15 minutes just to chew whatever questions you've got coming up together with Dave. So the rooms will close after 5 minutes, and off you go. Welcome back, everyone. So the format for this little bit is very straightforward. In pretty much bar the last minute, because I'm going to milk Dave for all he's worth, and in the time we've got him. It's what's coming up. What questions or comments do you want to throw out? Let's use the Zoom technology and just help me signpost. If you can use the raise hand thing, or if you can't find the raise hand command, wave at me like a loon, and I'll make a note that you want to say something. And let's see what's coming up in your reflection. So raise hands. Andy's in first. Andy's in.
Hi. So we were talking about a few different things. Part of what was front of mind for me as I was listening to the two of you talk, Dave and Steve, before we went into the breakout was we're hardwired to look for patterns in things. We have many more reactions that will make us run away from uncertainty than run towards it. So there's a level of anxiety in sitting there and knowing you don't know the answer to something that you need to be able to tolerate to sit in the middle of that. And right now, I get more curious about the level of background anxiety we're all dealing with because of what's going on in the world and the way that we're living. And is that actually making things like this worse at this point? And I'll stop there because that was kind of some of the stuff that was rolling around in my head.
Let me comment, and Steve, let me send you another paper to send out. I love the idea. My wife's a very good psychologist, as I've said, who told me I have OCD. I think depression is looking back and being depressed about the past. Anxiety is being discouraged about the future. And I think that anxiety of the future is tough. The word I love is uncertainty is real. And what we often want to do is solve it. The word I've been writing about is how do you harness uncertainty? I love the metaphor of a harness because it says uncertainty is a reality. How do you harness it? And we've got a couple of tips in a paper. And I think, Andy, yeah, there is uncertainty. I don't know when schools are going to reopen. At least that's where we are in the United States. I don't know where you are in your world.
Same.
I don't know when I'm going to get on an airplane again. By the way, I don't know if I ever want to get on an airplane again. It's been 12 months. I don't know what's going to happen. How do I harness that? How do I tame my apprehensions? How do I learn quickly? We've got 6 little tips in that. But I love that idea, Andy, of anxiety is future focused, not past. And it's about uncertainty. And the agenda is to harness it. Don't try to solve it. Don't try to get away from it. But how do I harness that and let the uncertainty become a positive? We'll send you some thoughts on that. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. So I think next was Alex, and then we'll go to David and Zara.
I was with Alison, and first of all, we were just saying how much we were loving this, so I just thought I'd throw that in as well. And then we were talking about things from a consultancy point of view. So I was kind of giving an example of a bid that we'd put in this week that was a very formal bureaucratic bid where we weren't allowed access to the client beforehand, could only use a written brief, and they wanted to know specifically what models we would use with the organisation and how I was stuck in a situation of going, I've got no idea. I don't know what your problem is. I can only see it on a piece of paper. But if I don't put anything in, I'm basically not going to get past this paper phase and find you. So what the hell do I do with that? And I ended up looking wishy-washy with kind of going, I might do it like this, but it depends if that's the problem. And it almost fed into that thing you were talking, Steve, I think, about collusions of how, it was where we were.
Which is really interesting. So where I go with that is that's a lovely choice point that we as a consultant have. And it sounds like you didn't go there, which is, do I collude with the client and offer them the certainty that they are apparently inviting me to give them, and I may get the business? Or...
Well, I have your first line, Alex, is it Alex?
Yes.
Okay. We will create an organizational health assessment that will deliver agility in a world of uncertainty that will help people become more mindful and emotionally grounded. There you go.
Thank you very much.
That's the abstract. That's the abstract.
Could you come up with a snappy name for that?
Oh, and then you put semicolon, a very relevant approach. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
it's a victory by organization.
Anyway,
that's brilliant.
I'm sorry, Steve, I shut you off, but I
think I'd finish that. I'd finish that.
By the way, it's so hard as a consultant because our clients want certainty in a world of uncertainty, and to some extent that's fair. They need it, but I mean, the right answer is if you want certainty, call the M or the D or the B firm. There's M's, D's, and B's all over. They'll give you an answer. I want to create with you an answer that will give you guidance. By the way, their answer, and this is a line you might use, their answer is almost always rooted in benchmarking and best practices. What have others done? My answer is providing you guidance about what you should do. And if you want somebody to come in and tell you what others have done, there's others who do that better than us. But if you want somebody who will help you be more effective with what you need to accomplish, let us work with you. So, and by the way, if the client doesn't want that, I'm not sure you want to work with them.
That's really nice. Thank you.
Inevitably, they'll turn to somebody else.
So just as an observation, and I say just because it's rattling around my head, last week I posted something on LinkedIn which has had more views and comments than anything I've ever done before. And I didn't set out to do this. It's had over 30,000 views. And I basically critiqued McKinsey's latest model.
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
Now, there's had 150 odd comments, which is wonderful, and thanks very much to everybody who's done it. But here's the point. Not a single person who commented said anything other pretty much than, you're right, there's a problem, this is an absurdity. And I'm just struck again by the fact that we are all in violent agreement about something. And on LinkedIn, we can have, loads of people agreeing with that kind of hypothesis. And yet the dominant narrative and discourse still is one of offering certainty. So that's what sparked there, Alex. Thank you.
So how do you turn that? And I don't have an answer for this. I think one of the things, by the way, that I think in that world of uncertainty, Andy, that you and your partner talked about, is I think we have to live in a world of paradox. I think we have to live in a world of duality. On the one hand, I want certainty. On the other hand, the world is not certain. On the one hand, I don't want solutions. On the other hand, I can't come in with no solutions. I think navigating that paradox becomes so difficult. So, Steve, how on the one hand do you criticize McKinsey or Deloitte or Bain or Booz or me, and on the other hand, find something that works? And how do you navigate across those tensions? We just talked about some leaders while you were in your breakout groups. We were having the best conversation in the history of the world that you'll never hear. That was between Steve and I. Some leaders are predisposed to quick fixes. Some leaders are predisposed to theoretical ambiguity. How do you navigate that tension that you've got to have thoughtful insight and you've got to have rigorous action? Yeah. I think navigating that tension and paradox or duality, that's not a new, that's yin and yang. I think that's one of the challenges, Alex, we face in consulting. Yeah. What's the predisposition of my client and how do I navigate the tension? Okay, there was a comment I cut off.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it kind of fits with one of the things we were talking about. And the question it raises for me is, how much effort and attention do we as consultants actually pay to addressing and helping the clients manage these levels of anxiety in dealing with those paradoxical challenges? Because we talk about it, we've identified it, and yet when I've been in the same situation that we all had, client wants certainty, there's no certainty to be able to give. It's very ambiguous, it's a fluid situation. How much certainty do you give them at the beginning to allay enough anxiety to get into the real conversation and do the real work? I guess my question is, to what extent are we colluding with some of that and not really having the conversation, not getting into the conversation around anxiety.
Great question.
Which talks to the fact that it's an illusion that we as consultants don't have anxiety.
Yeah.
And the question is how often, what was rattling through my head, and we'll come to David next one to make sure we get David and Zara's questions in. Let me ask you all a question. And I don't expect you to answer it, but I want you to kind of chew on this. How comfortable are you being wrong? I don't just mean I'm wrong, but in 3 months' time, you'll realise I was right, like Tony Blair did. But flat out, hands up, I got that wrong. I hold one of my principles is I can say stuff with certainty, but I'm totally open to the possibility that there's data out there that could come back and prove me wrong. And I'm not convinced that enough of us are actually prepared to go, yeah, I'm wrong. So thanks, Angus. David.
Hi there, good afternoon. I was in a meeting room with Dean, and I think we both landed on the challenge of how do you compete with these large consulting houses who perpetuate the silver bullet. They have systems and models that they use that tend to be pretty much run-of-the-mill for them. And they're also creating lots of new young consultants who are continuing to perpetuate that whole movement. And I'm talking about big organizations like, we'll say, BCG and PwC and all that, who come into organizations and basically get that business by saying, we will do this by then and achieve that. How can we wean organizations off of that? Is there anything we can do, guys? Is there anything?
Who has an idea? Who has an idea?
Who's that? Yep, Andre.
Hi, I am freelancing consultant, and I work as an OD manager in a small company as well, like both these times. But I am ex-Deloitte, so that's why I think I can relate to this. And first point is that the first silver bullet I've learned in Deloitte was called Dave Ulrich's model.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
Second is that I think that a lot actually happens before you talk to the customer for the first time, because for some reason that meeting is happening, and many times the client actually already thinks or already knows the answer that, okay, I want agile in my company. And then he looks for a company who is experienced in implementing agile. So all this analytical thinking is already skipped, and then you have to fight back against their prior convictions. So this is the business development part, that the clients already have the answer. They just need to justify it. And there's this old saying that no one was ever fired for following McKinsey advice. So that's one part. And to me, the answer is to have the relationship with the client already. And if he knows you and he knows that you have delivered some value on prior projects, then he will have a trust in you and the leap of faith to help you, to help him to find a new answer. But it doesn't work on a first contact, never ever.
I'm just going to hold you there because thank you. I want to get Zara's question in before we go. So it might have to be a pithy response. Zara, do you want to throw in your question?
It's not so much a question, it's kind of more of a suggestion, really. I mean, I come from a corporate background myself, and personally, I was in a position where I was working at IT security, and I've been there for 7 years, but my promotion was always stopped, okay? And I was basically acting as a consultant, but earning about 25K for about 7 years. And I brought in a whole new system, and I was basically the change agent across the globe. I was never recognized as one. My manager always took credit for me. Until one day they decided to centralize it over to US. I'm not going to mention any names here. You're not supposed to talk bad about your company. Until I actually got RSI through actually the system that I had. Then the manager's manager realized my, where I stood in the middle of all this and wanted to give me an Excel spreadsheet job. So what I was saying was, I think it's really about our people matter, the closer the more. I want to make this a motto in our business. And that's a solution I want to offer. And it's not about, you know, the company itself, but it's looking at the individual people and making sure that they are happy in themselves, in their homes, because all of that affects everything. And unless the guy at the top sat there ordering everybody what to do, and the guy at the bottom's getting squeezed, that health suffers. And then it actually cascades all the way to the top, and it affects the top bottom. And I'm just saying, if you make sure your people are happy, you will actually make sure that your company is actually doing well, because when people are happy, they will do their best. And I worked in another company where I actually made sure people were okay about their traveling, what was going on at home, as well as looking at processes. And I brought in PMO, and we looked at risk management and change management. And I talked to the clients and the relationships across the board, and we increased efficiency and the top level by 15%, and the entire company decided to take over my model. Now, okay, fine, it was something which you kind of did as an agile base, but there are solutions that we can do step by step, and just looking at where we are, having a pilot scheme and going, is this working for us? Is this working for our clients? Is this working for the consultants? And making sure people were happy, and not one single person had one single day off sick, whereas before me, they were £1 million in debt with a client, and somebody had taken off 6 months off sick with unhappiness and illnesses. So
Thank
there
you.
are ways ahead.
Can I
conscious
make
that-
3 quick comments? So we're
Yep.
at the end, Stephen. I'll be real quick. 3 things to respond to your questions. Number 1, ask clients what they want. What is it you want? What are your assumptions? What are your goals? What are your aspirations? 2, turn the activity they want into an outcome. You started by listing in the chat room on Menti, resilience, mindfulness, best practice, 7S. Tell the client whatever they call you in for, the 2 words, so that. I want to do mindfulness, so that. I want to do 7S, so that. I think the so that forces what they want from activity to outcome. Number 1, ask clients what they want. Number 2, ask so that you get an outcome. And number 3, get the client to recognize, I don't want to solve the symptom. I want to go to the underlying problem. I think we do a lot of symptomatic quick fixes. You have a cold, stick a tissue up your nose. No, that's not the solution. I want to solve the underlying problem. So those are my 3 silver bullets.
Dave, brilliant. I did not set Dave up for that. Can I just be really clear? That was not planned. Right. So bang on the hour. I know it's short, and it would love to be carry on, but this is always the tension with these sessions. You will all get an email from me in the next, probably the latest be Monday, but hopefully be tomorrow, with a link to the recording. I will send you the papers that Dave suggested, and feel free to share the recording. It's not, it's not proprietary. It's for you to, use as you see fit. If you've got any questions, then by all means email us. The next, I'll send you details of the mailing list if you're interested. And the next webinar, I'm hoping, is going to be with a professor at one of the UK's leading business schools, who is prepared to talk about how business schools collude with the whole silver bullet pattern. So I'm just trying to pin down a date for that, but that's hopefully coming in the next 2 or 3 months. Thanks, everyone, and see you again next time.
Thank you. That was really, really great. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.